joined today by Malcolm Driscoll of London-based FCS Compliance. So welcome, Malcolm.
Yeah, good afternoon. Hey.
Perhaps you could kick off by telling us a little bit about what FCS Compliance does and the kinds of services that you offer generally.
Yeah, sure. FCS Compliance started in 2016. Our founder was Jerry Walters, who I know, Gordon, you were aware of. The idea of FCS Compliance was born from Jerry's knowledge and experience and expertise, not only in law enforcement, but then building up expertise in the compliance market. And he started this business, say, in 2016, and it grew. Such was the development of the requirements of anti-money laundering compliance by businesses, especially the real estate market, which is the one that we primarily, not only now, but primarily have found ourselves involved with. That the requirement was there. And as such, we're in a position where I know we're the only company in the UK that does everything insofar as compliance. It's no wonder, because customer due diligence, I think, is quite a pain to people to complete it. It can be a time-consuming exercise. It takes time. It takes involvement with clients and customers, etc. So yeah, it definitely grew in that respect, and it grew to the extent that in 2019, Lonres, who I know you're aware of, saw Jerry, saw his business, and we became involved with each other. Lonres and FCS Compliance working together, which obviously increased the client base for us. The market seriously, grew and grew for us in that respect. And then in 2019, I came on board with Jerry to assist with all the things that you can see behind me, printed on this sign, which would be better in the O2 arena probably than in the small office that I work in. So yeah, that's us.
And something relocation specialists are often asked is, how come you got into relocation? And you get lots of weird answers about where we all originated from. So I have to ask you, Malcolm, how does somebody become involved in financial crime consultancy?
Yeah, so what would my background be in this? I mean, firstly, in respect to relocation agents, yeah, they're under the same banner as estate agents. So they're, we're all together in that, relocation agents. Have a look at the Estate Agency Act, and then have a look at HMRC's regulations about, who needs to be registered, etc., etc. And relocations, I actually looked at it again this morning just to remind myself of, because I had a phone call from one relocation agent, and they said, "Oh, can you refer me to, where I would go to?" I said, "Yeah, hmrc.gov.uk, guidance, who has to register, basically." And there it is. But for myself, well, I worked with Jerry in the City of London Police, which is where we were first working together. We worked there, and before Jerry went out to Guernsey. My total service is in 40 years in law enforcement. Now, I know, Gordon, you're sitting there thinking he can't have done 40 years police service. And obviously I started when I was 6. But the reality behind this is that, of course, law enforcement, financial investigation, fraud investigation, and financial intelligence, which is what both Jerry and I were involved in, has an overlap to organised crime groups, has an overlap and understanding and investigation of criminal behaviour. And I didn't realise quite so much at the time, because obviously I was looking at, you could say this is poacher come gamekeeper and that sort of thing, but essentially trying to catch villains that were laundering funds from all sorts of criminality. It doesn't matter who you're working for in law enforcement. You've got people trafficking, drug trafficking, drugs exploitation, robbery, thefts, fraud. I mean, the adverts on the TV now for fraud, you see people having their life savings taken from them. It goes somewhere. And the organised crime group that I was investigating in my last 4 years in law enforcement was an organised crime group, no stone left unturned insofar as their criminality. They all do it to make money. And how am I going to get rid of it? And the real estate market, I saw in that service the link to put it into property.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, of course, come this side of the fence and you see agents, relocation agents, property finders, all dealing with these property purchases. And of course, there's a compliance structure underneath, which everybody needs to be aware of. And of course, I found out, okay, good for business, but alarmingly, really, that the business, the real estate business, is there to be used and abused for a money laundering purpose. And agents have got to try and do the best they can to try and prevent it.
Yeah, just as an aside on that, Malcolm, I often hear that London is like a centre, the London property market is a centre for money laundering. Is that your experience?
I think it gets labelled as a centre. In some of the training sessions that I do, I use London examples, but by the same token, when I'm training people around the UK, I use examples from around the UK. And there is one very, very good example. I'm not, breaching any confidences or anything like that. There's one very good example of a West Midlands group operating in very sort of, shall we say, low property areas. But the fact is, they brought a lot of properties. So if you buy a load of properties with your ill-gotten gains, the proceeds of your criminality, you can get rid of just as much in numerous properties as you can in just putting it into one property. Yeah. So yeah, I don't get carried away with the idea it's all London, purely and simply because if you look around the country, if I was a money launderer, then I wouldn't necessarily look in London. I'd probably go to where it's a little bit quieter, and hope that agents don't really know what they should be asking me.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. Yeah, because presumably now London agents in particular, and we're talking whether it's estate agents, letting agents, relocation agents, are probably quite sophisticated in their knowledge, or we'd like to think so anyway, and are aware of the risks of not complying, etc. Whereas presumably there may be other, you say, quieter parts of the country where maybe the agents aren't quite on the ball, and so it's a little bit easier for money launderers to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think it is, but I do think overall every area has those that do and those that don't. Even London, whilst London should be, primarily aware, everybody else should be in the same boat. But there's the resistance sometimes to, to wanting to accept that this is going to happen, and the sort of belief that, well, I know my clients, I'm sure it's okay. Good luck with HMRC when they walk through the door on that one. Yeah, around the country, I think it varies. I think there's an acceptance by some and a resistance by others, no matter where they are in the UK. But all I can say is, don't put yourselves in that position. It's simple to do. CDD, completing customer due diligence, can be, quite time consuming, as we've already said. But don't put yourselves in a position of being vulnerable unnecessarily. Incidentally, I should say, this isn't just about HMRC, keeping HMRC happy. I've already mentioned them a number of times, but this is about keeping the business safe. Yeah, and I talk on my training sessions about the reputational damage that will be done, because they have a naughty list. HMRC have a naughty list. It's not just Centre.
Yeah, and I'm aware that some of the banks have had their reputations clobbered because their anti-money laundering processes haven't been tight enough, and it's the bad publicity as much as the heavy fines that are bad.
Absolutely. I think NatWest, I saw an item this week that suggests that NatWest are expecting 200 million fine.
Okay, coming specifically then to relocation agents, and most of our members are what we would call destination service providers, DSPs. They're searching for possibly property to purchase, but more likely it's rental properties for expats coming into the UK. And they are now aware that they've been pulled in by the legislation, and particularly in the letting context, if they do any properties home search that's worth more than 10,000 euros per month, they are now covered by the legislation, just as estate agents are. So that, for the first time, has pulled in a lot of DSPs that wouldn't have been included before. So what I'm quite interested to know, Malcolm, is what they have to register with HMRC, but it sounds as if that's actually the easy bit. You know, after that, it's everything that goes with it. It's the documents you have to have in place. It's the processes you have to have in place. And I just wondered if you could give us an overview of what these documents and processes that are necessary for a relocation agent coming to this for the first time.
Yeah, we'll do. Firstly, I'm going to disagree with you. The HMRC website for registration, I would never say it's the easy bit. From the calls that I have, and I try and give advice, bearing in mind, of course, I don't actually have to register on it, so I don't actually see it, but I've known so much about it now, I can probably sort of visualize it. And it is a government website, and I'll probably say no more about it than that, other than it's not the easiest thing to navigate through. You want to put certain answers in and you can't find them. So if any of your members want to go on to HMRC and register because they haven't, yes, they do need to be registered. HMRC are quite hot at the moment. We'll come on to their inspections, I'm sure, in a little while about what they're currently doing, because it changes from time to time. It obviously changed during COVID, but they're still, you know, they kept on checking on people despite COVID times and how they were doing it at a distance. So the registration is one thing, and it may well be that the members can't see drop downs that they're actually looking for. So you do the best you can, and then you probably get a response from HMRC saying you missed this one or you missed that one, etc. But insofar as the core things that must be had, and these are, and I'll refer to these when we talk about HMRC inspections later on, because they have actually flooded the market now with those in the real estate business of, you know, can we check you're compliant? So the services that we provide, the primary services are that you must have a policy and procedures manual, an anti-money laundering policy and procedures manual. I've been given, Gordon, 4 pages on occasions by agents that have said, I think you'll find this quite impressive. Looking at 4 pages, I'm never going to find it quite impressive, yeah, in any way, shape or form. The manuals that we produce are 120 pages long. Okay. Now, that you could say is probably a third of that, probably, is all the appendices you could probably need or possibly need to be anti-money laundering compliant. If you tick all the boxes on the appendices, and not all of them are applicable for each one. Sometimes you've obviously got the seller, sometimes you've got the buyer, sometimes you've got the tenant, sometimes you've got the landlord, etc. Yeah, but it's basically, you know, using those. So 4 pages, bearing in mind what needs to be covered in the anti-money laundering policy and procedure. You know, what is money laundering? Do you know about suspicious activity reports? You know, do you know what the red flags are within the business? Do you know about financial sanctions? Do you have anti-bribery and corruption policies within the business as well? You know, and obviously customer due diligence, the big one, customer due diligence. You know, are you doing it right? And you know, like I say, in 4 pages, in all honesty, that's never going to be covered. So the policy and procedures is one of the core things that HMRC will instantly want to see. The other one is the firm's risk assessment. The firm needs to have an anti-money laundering risk assessment. This is not, sometimes gets confused with the risk analysis on a particular individual that you're dealing with as a client or customer.
Okay, so this is about the business's overall assessment of their activities and where they may be at risk as a business.
Absolutely. Who do they deal with? How do they deal with them? Are they from the UK? Are they from overseas? Do you use online verification services? You know, how do you transact with them? Do you see them face to face? If you don't see them face to face, what do you do? You know, that's that. In other words, as you say, I think you used the word firm-wide, but yeah, a firm-wide risk assessment. This is who we are. This is how we operate. These are the measures we've got in place. This is where we can assess ourselves at being a low risk, a medium risk, or high risk of being used for money laundering. And just on the risk basis, if I just mention the national risk assessment, that's changed. In 2020, it changed. Before we had property assessed to be a medium risk, and agents, whether it's relocation agents, estate agents, property owners, they were assessed to be a low risk. Yeah. Now the property is assessed to be at high risk of money laundering. Yeah, this isn't taken lightly. You know, this is Her Majesty's Treasury, this is Her Majesty's Home Office that have looked at all this, and because of the greater understanding they've got, especially insofar as businesses, structures overseas. Think about the Pandora Papers 3 weeks ago, you know, etc. That greater understanding means that, hang on, people aren't finding out who's behind these companies, who's behind the trusts, and this is all carrying on. It's a wonderful vehicle for being a money launderer.
Yeah.
So the firm can say, this is who we are, this is who we deal with. Is it a landlord, a tenant, a buyer, or a seller, etc. So that's what they'll look for first of all, and obviously the training services. Yeah, we do provide the training services. It is a legal obligation to be trained. The strange thing, and in talking about government directions and all that sort of thing, there is nothing specific that follows that other than the word regular training. And my advice would always be chip in, certainly sort of every 12 months. For those that engage with us, we try and keep them up to date with anyway with legislation. If there's any changes, like as you were saying, you know, the legislation changed and lettings came in under 10,000 euros. So we do the refresher courses as well. The foundation course is a good base, you know, from which to learn the fundamentals of this is what you've got to do and this is what you're doing on a daily basis. And I can speak from the experience there, because of us doing the customer due diligence services as well. We have to keep on top of what is going on in the world, and keep up to date with current activities. So everything I'm training, I'm actually doing myself. So it's quite important to keep on top of it.
Actually, just as an aside there,
yeah,
Malcolm,
sure.
I used to work in a law firm, and there, every single member of staff, and there were, it could be several hundred members of staff, before they could start work, they had to pass an online money laundering assessment. And every single member of staff, I found that interesting. And you had to go over 70% in the assessment.
Yeah.
And that was before you could, get a keyboard and start working in anything throughout that office. So it does show how for many years, legal profession have had to take this incredibly seriously. And in particular, the aspect you're talking about there of staff training.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that as well, because I've had many a conversation with agents who have done the online training. I used to do online training in my police service. And again, as a financial intelligence officer and financial investigator, I had to pass a test a month. And again, it was like 4 questions on some particular subject, probably a legislation, changes in legislation, some part, that was a learning exercise. And I've got to say for myself, I found that pretty lacking insofar as learning anything. The object was to get the 4 out of 4 and then carry on, as you say, like with the day's work, because I've got to get on, So I think the face-to-face training, I think being able to ask questions is far more beneficial than the online. But I know it goes on. I mean, just continuing on the training, and an obligation is each firm has to have a money laundering reporting officer. Yeah. The MLRO, as they're affectionately known, an absolute necessity. So the training is structured to be the refreshers for those that need it, the foundation for those that just want to make sure they've got all right, am I doing this right? Let me just check if I'm doing it right. Then an advanced level, and then the money laundering reporting officers course, which is obviously a little bit heavier because of their obligations to reporting suspicious activity.
Yeah.
I said the customer due diligence, I won't go into all of that, but obviously customer due diligence insofar as individuals, companies, and trusts. Insofar as the individuals, whether you're dealing with a company or a trust, you're always looking for an individual, and that I think is not always appreciated. And I've examined files. We do conduct audits as well, similar to what HMRC do. So it's probably better for us to do it, find something wrong, let you know, so you can put it right, rather than have HMRC finding it. But the customer due diligence, needs to be done right. All the things involved in that. And I've examined files where companies' house has just been used as a form of information. That's fine. I can find the company on company's house. I'll stick that in the folder, and then I'm sure that's okay. And of course, I have to disappoint by saying it's not, far from it, because you and I, we could decide to become directors of a company tomorrow.
Yeah.
And yet we may not have any control over the assets or title to a property that we're dealing with. You know, it might be a benefit, or be a beneficial owner. You know, with more than 25% of the shares, but Companies House won't necessarily give us that. Is it up to date? They publish, what they publish is what we send them, Gordon.
Yeah.
It's not checked. It will be. It looks like it's going to be. Companies House looks if they're going to have some sort of customer due diligence process in vetting people that are sending their information through. So it might become a bit more reliable. So I'd never say rely on Companies House for information. Always communicate with the companies. Please send me what I need for customer due diligence. And the same with trusts.
Yeah.
You know, you'll struggle till you're blue in the face trying to be less inconvenient to your clients and customers by not asking them too many questions, and you'll end up going around in circles. So if you're involved in the trust, ask the trust for the documents.
You know, it's interesting you say that. You know, you use the term inconvenience, and again, thinking of my time working in a law practice, you win a new client, and particularly if that client, it might be American, they might be French, it's a company structure, and suddenly, before you've done any work for them, you bombard them with these questions.
Absolutely,
and you know, it could get quite difficult at times where they're saying, no, you know, I'm not prepared to do this. And you had to find a way of getting that information. You just could not start that file without being able to say, yeah, we're satisfied in this. But it goes against your grain. If you're trying to win business and you're successful, the last thing you want to do is put up a hurdle before you've even started working for them. I think it's probably become easier because everyone now is aware of money laundering. You know, if you open a bank account, the things you have to go through. So I think most companies, and certainly in Europe, North America, are aware that these are essential checks. It's not you being difficult as an advisor.
You're absolutely spot on. And I think something that's made a difference, is the overall awareness, and then it's reinforced. And within the manuals that we produce for agents, one of the appendices that I was talking about is actually like the draft letter. So at the same time as having this contract of agreement, it actually goes out and it says, this is who we are as a company. This is what we do. This is what we'll ask you for. And this is why we ask you for this. We comply with the money laundering regulations. We have to do this to be safe and secure for money laundering. It's basically saying, we're not treating you any different to anybody else. This is our obligation. We do things properly, you know? And as I always say, if somebody says, well, I don't want to give you this information, and you see somebody go to an agent down the road, well, let's hope that agent can sleep at night if they're the ones that don't do the information. And I think you'll get probably more people say, yeah, I want you to, and how are you going to keep that information as well? You've already told them, this is what we're going to do. We're going to keep it safe and secure. And if you go to somebody that doesn't ask those questions, well, what are they actually doing with your information if they're going to get anything from you at all? So, yeah, I think it's good to get in at the start and say, we're going to ask you for this, just to let you know. And this is why. So good in that respect.
Again, another aside, in the relocation industry, we talk a lot about personal data and protecting personal data. Am I right in thinking that for money laundering records, businesses should keep these records for 5 years? Is that the kind of rule of thumb?
Yeah, it is. It is for 5 years. There are 3 exceptions to the 5 years, and I know many relocation agents, many agents will actually deal with the same people time and time again, because it's a reputation, isn't it? You know, I'll come back to you because of the way you deal with me. I'll always come to you, Gordon, because you know the way you look after me, and I think you provide me with a good service. You're allowed to keep them for 5 years. If I said to you, keep my records for longer, then that consent of me would be okay. But obviously,
okay.
yeah, but make sure you've got it in writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If it's not in writing, it never happened, is the way I look at these things.
Yeah.
The other exceptions are if you know there's a court case.
Right.
Okay, in which case you'll be told that you can't get rid of them, or you'll know you can't get rid of them, and you don't get rid of them until you're told you can get rid of them. The other reason would be if you would have to have reasonable grounds to believe that there is going to be a court proceeding. Yeah. And again, all this time, proportionally, we're making notes as to why we're keeping them for longer than that. But yeah, primarily 5 years. And don't do what I was told on the training session the other day with an agent. He said, we comply with GDPR. I said, oh, that's good. He said, yeah, we don't keep anything. Well, I said, well, you must keep something, surely. No, to comply with GDPR, we don't keep anything. I said, well, you're supposed to keep it for 5 years. And what are HMRC going to say if they come through and you say, no, we've shredded it all? He said, well, we have shredded it all. I said, well, good luck with the roll of sellotape and the shredding bag then, because you're going to have to put it all back together again. So yeah, that's primarily. I mean, talking about HMRC, and just to finish on the services, yeah, we can come back to this very shortly about what they're currently doing. We do provide a support service. I've been present when HMRC are on site. It sometimes takes the heat off the agent a little bit, because HMRC will ask me about the company. I'll have probably done the policies and procedures. I'll have done the risk assessment. I'll have probably done the training. I know what we provide has got the clean bill of health from HMRC, so I'm glad about that. That you know what we do for agents and what they send off to HMRC is good. So that's pleasing, but it sometimes takes the heat off. And then just to finish on the services, suspicious activity reports. It was my world. I used to receive suspicious activity reports.
Right.
So I used to see, wherever they'd come from. And these are highly confidential documents. My last 10 years of service was with British Transport Police, and everybody thinks that's just to do with tickets. This was every crime you could think of, other than burglary, because they don't have a residential population. Every crime, money laundering, people trafficking, drug trafficking, etc. So having seen those reports come through to me, I have to make quick decisions on them. So insofar as constructing them, it was my world. I used to see them. So we now do them for agents as well.
And what would be a typical, an example, a common example of the kind of thing that would trigger an agent to say, oh, should I be submitting a suspicious activity report? What kind of things would typically?
Okay, let's go for two examples, two easy examples of, shall we say, one buying and one selling. Insofar as a seller, and I'll quote an example that happened. It's the easiest thing to do to tell you an example. We were doing customer due diligence for somebody that wanted to sell the property. They were a high net worth individual, so saw that straight away. It doesn't necessarily have to apply to the fact they were a high net worth individual, well known. And in doing customer due diligence on them, it appeared they're under investigation. They're not convicted. Yeah. The suggestions in the media is that they've been money laundering the proceeds of the criminality while they're in a particular position.
Okay.
Yeah? If you look at what the investigation covers, it covers money laundering. It covered a period of time, to the best of my memory, I think it was 2010 to 2014. And this property that the agent wanted to market was bought in 2012. So therefore, it's smack bang in the middle of these potential, these allegations.
Yeah.
So therefore, you would submit a suspicious activity report, because you're either submitting it to let the National Crime Agency know, and you're going to have nothing to do with the transaction, or you submit it because you want to stay in the transaction and you're seeking what they call a defence against money laundering.
Okay.
Because you don't want to be charged with money laundering, because essentially, if you do, you're going to be receiving some of the proceeds of that criminality. Yeah, the solicitor might get the main funds, and you might get the funds from the solicitor's account. But in essence, you're part of the transaction. You're part of the proceeds of that transaction. But the other one, insofar as a buyer, Easiest example actually happened. I was doing customer due diligence on a potential buyer, and I found out he was on the run from prison.
No.
Been on the run from prison for 4 years, and his fraudulent activities they'd never recovered the funds. So I think he'd laid low. There was looking to buy a property. So in that respect, the first one I said was a defence against money laundering. Can we continue with this transaction? This one was the agent saying, so what do I do now? So I said, I think you want to send a suspicious activity report through. And they said, how do we do that? Like most agents do. And then that's another service that we provide, put it together. Because it needs to be, I mean, all this time this is going on. If you're going to stay in the transaction, then you're waiting for a response.
Yeah.
And you can imagine the nightmare that agents have had sending things backwards and forwards between them and the NCA, because the NCA can't really understand what they're asking.
And am I right in thinking, again, going back to my days in a law firm, that one of the things you couldn't do if you submitted a suspicious activity report, you couldn't let your potential client know that you'd done that, because that in itself was an offence of tipping off, is that?
Tipping off, yeah, absolutely. And I've known that. I've known, despite what people have been told, they've actually, in trying to placate, shall we say, a seller, the seller, what's the hold up? Can you tell me what the hold up is? Oh, we've just made a report to the National Crime Agency about the buyer because we're a little bit concerned. It's probably okay. And then what does the buyer do? The buyer thinks, I wonder if anything's going on here, contacts the seller and says, do you know what the hold up is? Yeah, I think the estate agents has just made a report to the National Crime Agency about, just a bit concerned. Sure, it's okay though. Tipping off at its very best. You'd think it wouldn't happen. It does.
That's a great example. So, Malcolm, I've jotted down here headings like creating a policy, carrying out your firm risk assessment, staff training, customer due diligence, and then we ended there with suspicious activity report. So these are all the documents, the processes that a firm will really have to get their teeth into. Yeah. Now, if we could move on finally to the aspect that I'm sure most agents fear, they get a phone call or a letter from HMRC saying they're going to conduct an audit. How do you help a firm prepare for that? What should they make sure they have in place?
Gordon, it's a good question, because I think I said right at the start, things have changed a little bit with HMRC. If they change back to what they were, I might as well say what they were, which was a quick phone call. We're going to do an inspection, followed by an email. The email used to say, just to confirm we'll be on site on a certain date. However, in advance, send us your policy and procedures manual and your risk assessment manual and your training record. So it highlights really, irrespective of whether everything else is okay, that is a great starting point to make sure you've got them, because that's the first things they ask. Even now, they're asking for the policy and procedures and the risk assessments.
Yeah.
It is strange at the moment, bringing this up to date, they're not asking for the training record in the first contact. And generally it's an email or a letter that arrives to the money laundering reporting officer at a particular firm. Obviously they've got to have one. And what it's saying, and the format of the letter currently is that we want to do an inspection on you. And we are talking about all relevant people up to 25th of June 2017 and all relevant people after 26th of June 2017. And of course that throws agents into a little bit, well, what's the difference? Yeah. And of course the difference is that 26th of June onwards was the money laundering regulations that included information on the buyer.
Oh, right.
Which is actually written there. But of course, when you get a HMRC letter, you're frantically probably trying to read the words and not really seeing what's there. So that's that one. And they asked then about the background to the business. Yeah, what do you do? How many staff have you got, and that sort of thing. Thankfully, for the ones that we've worked with and done the manuals, it actually includes it, so they can refer very, very quickly. I'll tell you very, very briefly about the company, and I always recommend just a couple of short paragraphs. But please see the policy and procedures manual, which again I refer back to that 4 pages. You're never going to have enough, in 4 pages to cover all these things. So they'll do that. And then, depending on what they see, they will, they've basically followed it up with phone call visits at the moment. I haven't heard yet that they've come on site, but what they'll do is they'll ask for how many relevant clients you've had in the last 12 months, is the current one. Relevant clients being, in other words, who you've dealt with that are under the money laundering regulations. So if you're dealing with lettings and you've not got any that are over 10,000 per calendar month, you wouldn't, they wouldn't qualify as relevant. And that, they will then say, okay, open up the files, and they'll ask some questions. The last one I heard of was HMRC on the phone for a considerable time, because they examined over the phone, or possibly through this sort of contact, 9 files.
Oh, wow.
So when I was present for HMRC inspections, it was generally 6. On the audits that we do, we basically look at 4, as well as if you've got a policy and procedure, if you've got a risk, if you want us to check it, then we do. And just to provide it, I've never been able to pass one. And that's not in pursuit of business. It's just basically because the same things are wrong, or the same things are missing generally from one file to another. And in the audits of the files, they're basically the same things as to whether they're correct or not.
Yeah.
So I only really need 4, because I look at 4 and it's the same mistakes over and over again.
So it's effectively like a trial audit that you're doing in advance. Yeah. So, and are there sort of 1 or 2 lessons out of that then for relocation firms, things that typically go wrong that you would say, really focus on this?
Yeah, there are. The certification of documents is massively misunderstood. Massively misunderstood. Documents need to be certified. You can, as agents, you're allowed to certify them because you're in the regulated sector. And yet I've seen documents with just a squiggle. It doesn't say anything. It's just a biro squiggle, which somebody has said, well, this means that I've seen it and it's all okay. It doesn't say anything. It's just a squiggle. And I actually saw that handed up or held up in a HMRC inspection. Can anybody remember who saw Mrs. Smith shouted across the office? It's not particularly good in front of HMRC. So I certify this as a true likeness of, and if you've seen the original, say that you've seen the original.
Yeah.
Those certifications are wrong. If it comes to you certified, but nobody's checked on the verifier, nobody's checked on the certifier, which is another obligation to do. Are they who they say they are? Is this a bona fide person? Tom Wood, 12th of December 2018. Who's Tom Wood? You've got no idea who he is, that sort of thing. So it needs to be a proper certification. And the other ones, I mean, there are quite a few, as I say, I've not been able to pass any. And that's not in pursuit of business. It's just trying to give people a bit of a heads up. Yeah. Simple things like checking land registry. Yeah. Who owns the property that you're connecting with? If you're looking to sell that property, who owns it? And I've been told many times that, well, it's the people that we saw at the house. I've got they let us in. Okay, I said, well, I've got a key to my next door neighbour's house. They wouldn't be very happy if I sold it for them, no. Who has title? Is it the individual? Is it individuals? Is it a business or company, or is it a trust? You don't have to do land registry, but you certainly have to know who you're acting for, who's involved in the transaction. So those are very common mistakes. And the other one is not knowing the other side to the arrangement. So if you're acting for a buyer, you should also try and get the seller's details as well.
Yes, that came as a surprise to me when I attended one of your seminars, and you really have to follow up then. Some agents, I believe, selling agents are good at certifying the information on that they've collected, but others will refuse to take responsibility for it. So it can get quite messy, I understand.
Yeah, it's probably not even so much certification, it's sort of like handing it over. And bearing in mind both parties are in the regulated sector. It should be easier, it should be more understood. The bigger companies, I know they, with big compliance departments, they take decisions. They love to get all the documents in for both parties, but they're not too keen on sending their compliance information out. So yeah, that happens, but you have to make your best effort to try and get the other party. If you're part of the transaction, if you're acting for the individual that's looking to, take possession of a property, you should know who the landlord is, that sort of thing, and who the seller is.
Well, Malcolm, it's been a very short period of time, but we seem to have covered a huge amount of ground, and I'm sure we're just scratching the surface. So on behalf of our members, I'd like to thank you for bringing so much clarity to what is clearly a complicated area of compliance. And I will make sure that for members who want to contact you, we'll have your contact details in the course notes, or members can come to me to be referred on.
Absolutely, yeah, no problem.
That's great.
I don't want anybody getting caught out with this. Like I say, HMRC are hot at the moment. I think the fines last year were 200 million that they imposed, 300 and something million the previous year. So they weren't exactly quiet during COVID. If they're imposing those sort of fines, it's the reputational damage that can be done. But no, if we can help in any way, obviously, we'll do our best to do that on anything.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, and thanks to everyone for watching. And bye for now.
Thanks a lot, Ron. Thanks everybody.